On October 28th, 1701, William Penn, the governor of the territory we now call Pennsylvania, issued his Charter of Rights and Privileges, a document which defined the freedoms and obligations of citizens, including the freedom of religion. It was a revolutionary document, and 50 years later, in celebration of its Jubilee year, the Pennsylvania State Assembly commissioned a magnificent new bell for their state house. That bell, which we now know as the Liberty Bell, was inscribed with part of a biblical verse chosen by the Speaker of the Assembly, a devout Quaker named Isaac Norris. And the words he chose were Kratem dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshva, proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Why was this pasuk chosen? And what was the liberty that they were celebrating? It couldn't have been the liberty of 1776, because the Revolutionary War was 20 years beyond the horizon. Instead, it was the religious liberty that Penn had extended to all Pennsylvanians. And why this pasuk? Because of the way it begins. V'kidashtem et shnata chamishim shana, and you shall sanctify the 50th year, which was how many years had passed since Penn had granted that religious freedom. Combined, the messages of this inscription is an extraordinary play on words, use of a biblical text that only one who was so well versed as Norris was could create. But what about the rest of the pasuk? The part that didn't make it into the annals of American history and yet is integral to our history, as we'll read this Shabbat. What about the words, Yovel hi tiyeh lachem, a jubilee year shall it be for you, v'shavtem ish el achuzato, and you shall return, every man unto his heritage, v'ish el mishpachto tashuvu, and every man unto his family you shall return. What do the opening words about liberty, ukratem dror, have to do with the responsibility to return to one's family and one's ancestral lands? Halachically, the answer is that these words convey the mitzvah that property that had been sold over the past 50 years was returned to their original owners, because the land of Israel ultimately retains its tribal divisions. Additionally, the words, every man unto his family, ishel mishpachto, you shall return, teach us that all indentured servants, including those who during a previous Shemitah cycle had chosen to remain in servitude, must be freed. And yet a friend and colleague of mine, Rabbi Shmuel Golden, suggested that there is a second fundamental idea found within these words. He explained that the idea that every 50 years we remember God's mastery by returning to our heritage and our families is because true freedom cannot be achieved through a complete severance with the past. Instead, in order to move forward in life, in order to chart a new course towards the future, the past, with all of its complexities, with all of its difficulties and all of its challenges, must be reckoned with, because the past contains lessons to be learned, successes to be valued, and failures to be confronted. And it's only when we return to our heritage and return to our families that those lessons can be learned. That's why the Torah insists that the Jew who has sold himself into servitude can't run away forever. Instead, he must return to his roots and confront the failure that led to his sale, which is the very same reason that the Torah instructs the property owner who sold his ancestral lands to take possession of it once again, to learn from his family who had lived all around, and to learn from his errors, which may cause him to have sold the land in the first place. We need to learn from the past to chart our future. We need to turn around and understand, which is the reason explained the Chatam Sofer, that when the Jewish people refuse to do so, God refers to us as an Am Keshei Oref, a stiff-necked people, a nation unwilling to turn around and learn from history. In a fascinating essay written in his Alei Shur, the great 20th century Bal Musar, Rav Shlomo Wolbe Zatzal, wrote about the dangers of frumkeit. He wrote, on the narrow path that leads to truth in the service of God, there's a stumbling block called frumkeit. Frumkeit is a natural, instinctive urge to connect to the Creator. But like any other instinctive urge, it is egotistical and self-centered. Accordingly, frumkeit drives a person to do what is only good for himself, while positive actions, ben adam lechavero, between man and his fellow man, as well as wholehearted actions between man and God, are not fueled by frumkeit. Even if such a person were to impose many chumrot, many stringencies upon himself, he would not become a man of chesed, of kindness, and he would not reach the level of selfless service. This is why, wrote Rav Wolbe, we must base our avodat Hashem specifically on intellect, because the moment we abandon intellect and act from frumkeit alone, our service becomes twisted. We live in very trying times. We live in a pandemic that has claimed the lives of nearly 90,000 people in the United States and more than 300,000 people worldwide. We are forced to stay in place and forced to abandon things that come so naturally to all of us. Direct, in-person interactions, celebrations, minyanim, and so much more. Each of us is struggling not only to come to terms with the new reality, but to hold back from doing those things which were part of our daily lives. Our instincts tell us to open our shuls, to welcome guests into our home for Shabbos and Yom Tov, to hug our children and grandchildren, and to find ways around the laws of the land. Thankfully, most of us can withstand those temptations, to understand that those instincts are misplaced because they ignore the realities, ignore the recommendations of the experts, and ignore the experiences of both recent and distant past. Frumkeit and good intention are driving those, rabbis and laymen alike, to have minyanim in our community, to open batei medrash, and allow gatherings that should never be. But we know which road is paved with good intentions. And we must realize that Frumkeit, as Rav Wolbe taught, is self-centered, and in this case, threatens the lives not only of those who choose to ignore the guidelines of the experts, but our entire community. At this time of danger, we cannot afford to be a stiff-necked people, nor can we ignore the knowledge provided by health experts and endorsed by the Aguda and by the OU and the RCA. We must stand up and reject the frumkeit of the few and embrace the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah, which places the sanctity of life ahead of all else. Ukratem dror ba'aretz, proclaim liberty in your land so that we can live lives of cherut, of true devotion to God, and not selfish dedication to ourselves. That's the call that should be ringing loud and clear in our community. And that's the message that I pray we will celebrate in 50 years from now. Shabbat Shalom.